In this lecture, we will discuss about the Chipko movement in relation to forest, environment, and law, and why this movement, which started 70, almost 60 years ago, came into news as on 5th January 2025, Monday, the Supreme Court slammed the Uttarakhand government for being a silent spectator for 2 decades to rampant encroachment of forest land in Rishikesh. So the court also sought details of all illegal constructions. So a bench of Chief Justice of India, Suryakant, and Justice General Bagchi said the facts of this case prima facie show how private individuals systematically grabbed thousands of acres of forest land while the state government remained in slumber from 2000 till 2023. So, on that point, the bench in its previous order, which was delivered on December 22, 2024, what seems the bench had expressed shocking to us is that the state of Uttarakhand and its authorities are sitting as silent spectators when the forest land was being systematically grabbed in front of their eyes. So, on this very December 22, 2024, order, the bench expressed in its previous decision that meanwhile all private individuals are restrained from alienating the land, encumbering it, or creating any third party rights. It goes without saying that no construction activity shall be allowed to take place. Either the vacant land other than the residential houses shall be taken into possession by the forest department and the collector concerned, as it was previously ordered by the bench on December 22, 2024. So, again it was came into in this particular occasion on the very date of January 5th, 2025. So, we would like to touch exactly what Chipko movement and what Chipko means. So, we would like to discuss the very meaning and the very background and regarding that, as it was a peasants and women's movement. It was started in the 60s and 70s. So, it was a non-violent social and ecological movement by rural villages, particularly women in India, in the 1970s, aimed at protecting trees and forests. Slated for government backlogging, the movement originated in the Himalayas region of Uttarakhand. Then it was a part of the then state of Uttar Pradesh, and it was almost in the years of 1960s and 70s, and which quickly spread throughout the Indian Himalayas. So the very term Chipko, it is a Hindi word which means to hug or to cling to and reflects the demonstration's status primary tactics of embracing trees to impede loggers. So now we would like to go to the very background of this movement with the conclusion of the Sino-Indian border conflict in the 1962. Greatly it affected the rural Himalayan region. So, in that occasion, in the year 1964, environmentalist and Gandhian social activist Chance Prasad Bhatt founded a cooperative organization in the name Dasoli Gram Surajya Sangha. Later it was renamed as Dasoli Gram Surajya Mandal or DGSM to foster small industries for rural villagers using local resources. When industrial logging was linked to severe monsoon floods that killed more than 200 people in the region in the 1970. So, the DGSM became a force of opposition against the large scale industry. The first Chipko protest occurred near the village of Mandal in 1973. The villagers, having been denied access to a small number of trees with which to build agricultural tools, were outraged when the government allotted a much larger plot to a supporting goods manufacturer. When their appeals were denied, Chandi Prasad Bhatt led villagers into the forest and embraced the trees to prevent logging. After many days of those protests, the government cancelled the company's logging permit and granted the original allotment requested. Why the Dosali Gram Swarajya Mandal? With the success in Mandal, the village, the Dosoli Gram Swarajya Mandal workers and another great environmental activist, Sunderland Bhaugunna, began to share Chipko's tactics with people in other villages throughout the region. One of the next major protests occurred in 1974 near the village of Preni, where more than 2,000 trees were scheduled to be felled. Following a large student-led demonstration, the government summoned the men of the surrounding villages to a nearby city for compensation, ostensibly to allow the loggers to proceed without confrontation. However, they were met with women of the village led by Gaura Devi, who refused to move out of the forest and eventually forced the loggers to withdraw. The action in Reni prompted the state government to establish a committee to investigate deforestation in the Alkananda Valley and ultimately led to a 10-year ban on commercial logging in the areas. The Chipko movement thus began to emerge as a large peasant and women's movement for forest rights. Through the various protests were largely decentralized and autonomous. In addition to the characteristic tree hogging, Chipko protesters utilize a number of other techniques grounded in Mahatma Gandhi's concept of Satyagraha or non-violent resistance. For example, the environmentalist Sunderland Bhaugunna famously fasted for 2 weeks in 1974 to protest forest policy. So in 1978, in the Devi forest in the Teri Garhwal district, Chipko activist Dhum Singh Negi fasted to protest the auctioning of the forest, while local women tried sacred threads around the trees. In other areas also, that had been tapped. So, also in Pulna village in the Gandhian Valley in 1978, the women confiscated the luggage tools and left receipts for them to be claimed if they withdrew from the forest. It is estimated that between 1972 and 1979, more than 150 villagers were involved with Chipko Movement, resulting in 12 major protests and many minor confrontations in Uttarakhand. The movement's major success came in 1980 when an appeal from Sunderland Bhaugunna to the then late Prime Minister of India Indira Gandhi resulted in a 15-year ban on commercial felling in the Uttarkhand Himalayas. Similar bans were enacted also in the nearby state of Himachal Pradesh. The very movement continued, protests became more project oriented and expanded to include the entire ecology of the region, ultimately becoming the Save Himalaya movement. Between 1981 and 1983, Sunderland Bhaugunna marched 5,000 kilometers across the Himalayas to bring the movement to prominence. Throughout the 1980s, many protests were focused on the Theri Dam, on the Bhagirathi River, and various mining operations, resulting in the closure of at least some limestone quarries. Similarly, massive reforestation effort led to the planting of more than 1 million trees in the region. So, the very impact as it was began with the Dasoli Gram Swarajya Mandal by Chance Prasad Bhatt, and later on it was again involved another great environmentalist Sunderland Bhaugunna, ultimately as the peasants and women of Uttarakhand, they involved led by Gaura Devi. So it was Gaura Devi and Chandi Prasad Bhatt and Sundarlal Bhaugunna, those who led the very movement and to shape the Alkananda Valley and the Kumon Himalayas. So, in response to that, the Parliament of India and the then government of Mrs. Indira Gandhi made substantial amendments to the existing Indian Forest Act of 1927. So also, the Parliament of India enacted the Water Prevention Control of Pollution Act 1974, then the Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1981 in response to the environmentalists and the activities of the environmentalists to save forest, wildlife, and environment. And In that response, the major enactment that was enacted by the Parliament of India and by Mrs. Indira Gandhi's government was Forest Conservation Act of 1980. So also they have ultimately had, as per the very amendment made to the directive principles of state policy under Article 48A, which was inserted under the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act of 1976. It was given a direction to the state to make policies to save forest, wildlife, and natural resources and the natural environment. So also in the same amendment under 42nd Amendment 1976, the fundamental duties were inserted and as under Article 51A Clause G, also it was inserted as its responsibility and duty of citizens to work for the conservation of forest, wildlife, and natural resources which ultimately let impact on the environment. So, the Chipko movement, which was started by Chance Prasad Bhatt in 1964, it made involvement of another environmentalist of Uttarakhand, and that was Sunderland Bhaugunna. And gradually it turned into a peasants and women's movement as it was led by Gaura Devi, a local woman. So this led more impact on the Uttarakhand forest, so which ultimately banned all type of construction and quarries on the Alkananda Valley and Kumon Himalayas, which ultimately led to Sheb Himalayas. And this important discussion, as we are doing, due to the recent development in the Supreme Court exactly on Monday, 5th January 2025, when a bench of Chief Justice Suryakant and Justice Jugumaya almost made the point that the bench in its December 22, 2024 made the order regarding stopping all kinds of construction activities and all kinds of developmental activities on the forest lands and directed the Uttarakhand government to stop all illegal mining activities also on the Uttarakhand forest, as it was not done properly and the Uttarakhand government remained a silent spectator. So again, it was raised by their honorable bench on 5th January, Monday 2025, giving another direction to the state of Uttarakhand as to shape the Kumon valleys or the Himalayas from encroachment and all kind of mining activities, construction activities on the Kumon Himalayas, in particularly the Uttarakhand, which was previously a part of the state of Uttar Pradesh. So hereby we would like to conclude our discussion on the Chipko movement and how it was related to forest, environment, and on the very impacts of Chipko movement. There were certain large-scale amendments and changes and enactment of laws such as Amendment to Indian Forest Act 1927, then enactment of the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974, then the Forest Conservation Act 1980, the Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1981, and in particularly in the year 1976, where major amendments were made to this Constitution by inserting Article 48A in the directive principle of state policy by giving direction to the state, and also under fundamental rights by inserting Article 51A clause G, giving a responsibility and duty to the individual citizens to save forest, wildlife, and natural resources, which ultimately would shape the environment